So for today's What Wednesday question, we're going to talk about the question, what made you decide to buy an RV over, say, a tiny house?
In the beginning, we knew we wanted to downsize. We knew we wanted to be traveling around, so mobility for an RV is just, and for us, a little bit easier than a tiny home would be. You can move the tiny home around from place to place, but I would say it's not as friendly to move from week to week like we've been doing with an RV was kind of the big deal for us.
I mean, we're moving around, man, sometimes probably on average every 5 nights we're moving or something. So if you can imagine having a tiny house and moving that massive, it'd be much harder in a tiny house. Not to mention, I know we were at the tiny house show and somebody said that they kept their tiny house at an RV park, which I don't doubt, but I just can't believe that you could take your tiny house and go into any RV park. I think it would really limit your options of where you could go.
We haven't personally seen any tiny homes in RV parks, so I'm just not sure on how many of them allow tiny homes. And it might not be a big deal. I don't know. We haven't really seen it. And I know the park we're in now, I had somebody tell me that they asked if they could have a tiny home here, and they said no. So I know that can be an issue as well.
I think with mobility, the question just is, how often am I going to be moving around? We talked about this with the fifth wheel too. If you're going to move around a lot, like we are, every 5, 6, 7 days, or Class A or Class C or some sort of motorhome is awesome for that. If you're going to move around, maybe every 2 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that, I would say fifth wheel, travel trailer. But if you're going to move around, let's say you want to go somewhere seasonal, I think a tiny house could work, and we've looked at it for that. We thought it'd be cool to get out of Tennessee during the winter, during the coldest months of January and February, and maybe take the tiny house somewhere warm, and then come to Tennessee in the mild months. Pretty much snowbird, but with a tiny home. I could see it working for that.
Yeah, tiny homes definitely have a more homey feel to me than any kind of RV or travel trailer. You can customize them, which is something I really wish we could do more so in an RV. I know there's some things that you can add and take away, but for the most part they have their specific layouts and decor. So I love that with a tiny home you can be very personal. You can make it how you want it. You can design it how you want it. So that's one thing we loved about the tiny home. It's just very more so like a home, but it is harder to move that around often. So that was kind of the deciding factor for us. And
this wasn't as big of a deciding factor to us, but it's definitely a factor if you're wanting to get started with traveling. It's actually cheaper to go the RV route too. I mean, you could get started with an RV for like $5,000. I know some people get started for less than that, but I think it'd be tough to build a tiny house for $5,000 and travel the country in it. So it's just way cheaper as far as saving money on the front end, at least, with an RV. Now, in the long term, your $5,000 RV is probably falling apart as you're going down the road, and you're going to put some money into it. But you can at least get started sooner and cheaper with an RV than you would with a tiny house. I think an advantage too with an RV over tiny house, which ours is pretty big, it's a 40-foot, but we can go places with our 40-foot that we can't go with a tiny house. We went to Shenandoah National Park, and we're going to Colorado. I mean, something that big and that tall and that wide, I think it would be a lot harder to travel some of those places than it would be with an RV, especially if we can't get away with it, but if you can get away with traveling with a smaller RV, especially a smaller motorhome, and zip in and out of places, I mean, you don't have that option, with a tiny house, really.
When we went to a tiny house show, because we're so interested in them, they're a very cool option. One of the things we got to talking about, the people that make them said they do make them with slides. If you want slides, they can make them with slides, which gives you so much more room. The difference was their slides you had to manually move, and they said it would take a couple grown men to move the slides in and out, which I didn't know if it was something that, you know, if Nathan and I were.
Yeah, probably manly men. I don't know if I would really count it. So if I could just find a couple of grown men to help us push those slides, we could.
We just didn't know how difficult it would be, him and I doing that on our own.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, like most of your tiny houses, like 90% of the ones we saw didn't have the slides, probably more than that. It's definitely not normal, I wouldn't think, for them to have slides. So especially if you're going to build it on your own, or if you're going to have somebody build it for you, it might be tougher to get the slides. And so you actually don't get the same width in most of the tiny houses that you do in the RVs. They still feel bigger, so it's weird because I guess they're just taller, so they feel bigger, but you don't have, when you're looking down, you're walking, I mean, you don't have much of a walkway unless, you know, you get that slide out that takes manly men to move in and out. So those are some things we noticed, and that's why for us, the travel style we have right now, we feel like an RV is a better fit. That's not to say that tiny houses aren't for some people, and that's not to say tiny houses might not be for us at some point. We love exploring different options of tiny living in general. That's just where we are right now, and that's what's good for us. If you got any questions, comments, let us know.